On this week's episode of the Macworld Podcast, it's all about your hot takes. You have thoughts about the world of Apple, and we're going to talk about them on the show. It's going to be a good one, so stick around. Welcome to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola, here with Jason Cross.
Good morning.
And Michael Simon.
Hello, sir.
This episode is all about social media hot takes. You have thoughts, and we're going to share and respond to what you wrote. All the comments mentioned on the show can be seen in the show notes for the podcast on macworld.com. And before we get started, as usual, I'd like to apologize ahead of time for completely butchering the commenters' handles and reader names. Anyways, let's just jump into it. The first topic is about a news item from Monday, August 12th. Patreon, the company that provides membership platforms for online content creators, they announced that Apple is forcing them to switch the Patreon iOS app to Apple's payment system. That means Apple is going to take their 30% cut off of Patreon memberships paid through that app. And Patreon is advising creators to either raise its fees to accommodate Apple's cut or to tell new subscribers not to use the iOS app.
It's happening November 1st, and like maybe Jason knows the answer to this. Like, why were they not paying it before?
Well,
does anyone know?
Can't tell you what. I can't tell you what in that specific instance, like why Apple never had a problem with before. I know that Apple's rules require apps to use Apple's in-app purchase for any digital content, right? So, or service. What it and doesn't require it for real life goods and services. So the Amazon app, you buy like physical Amazon, goods. Right. You hire your plumber and you pay them through Square. You know, you don't have to pay those things, PayPal transfers and stuff like that. But I guess they had determined, this would be my guess, that I watched Patreon's entire half-hour explainer video on this, and they didn't mention why. But my guess would be that Apple has determined that the vast majority of Patreon creators are providing digital services. They're providing, comics or art or making typefaces or all the other things that people do. And those all would fall under that. So, there's just not a lot of, it's not like Etsy, right, where people are making crafts and selling that. There are some. And there are some who like maybe have a higher Patreon tier or something like that. There are some other bits to this too that are interesting. Like there are some people who have Patreon. Patreon lets creators have billing that bills, first of the month after they collect and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Like all those kind of things aren't going to work with Apple's system, and creators are going to have to get kicked off of those kind of things, or if they want to use them, they're going to have to go into their account and like go say, I want to use these things, and nobody's going to be able to sub on iOS at all, right? And like one-off purchases and stuff like that, like all those things aren't going to work right. It's to fit in within Apple's payment systems and stuff. What Patreon is doing for this is interesting. They're making it so that creators on Patreon will have an option. They'll have a radial button. They'll say, keep the prices the same for everybody. I'll eat Apple. I'll just get less. I'll get 30% less from everyone who subs on iOS, or raise prices only on iOS. So I get the same amount from everybody, and it covers Apple's cut.
Right. It's an automatic tool that they are providing to creators. And so for example, if it's a $10 subscription, it'll go up to $13.
Yeah, 13 just on iOS.
Within iOS, yeah.
Within iOS, or you can just say 10, so everyone's paying 10, and you will get less from iOS subscribers. So creators will have the control, an option for that. And it's, of course, only for new subs. Anybody who's signed up already and is already getting billing and stuff like that, none of that's going to get affected. But still, 30% off new subs is a ton. Patreon's cut is 8% now. Right. So if you're a creator, it's like, oh, triple what you were already losing to Patreon on top of that.
On top of it. Yeah. So almost 40%.
Being lost. But yeah, can you imagine just like getting 60 cents on the dollar for everything all the people are paying you as a creator to make stuff? So yeah, it's a rough situation. It's really messed up. And in everywhere but the EU, Apple has pretty stringent rules around how you're allowed to tell people go sign up somewhere else. This is the fight that we've been, just the latest example of this fight that people have been having forever.
And there's a whole bunch of iOS apps that just choose to avoid this completely. Like they don't like. So the one that started all this is Fortnite. So Epic put into their when this whole thing started, they raised their prices on iOS. First they raised their prices on iOS. So if you were buying V-Bucks for Fortnite, you were paying 30% more for, like a $10 V-Buck would be $13, just like we were saying. And then they decided like they were just going to kind of bypass that whole rule. Shipped, I think it went live, right, Jason? Like the app went live with an alternative payment thing, and then Apple just shut it down.
Yeah, they actually said they knew they were breaking the rule.
Yeah,
they were like,
they knew it.
They're like they did it. It's a standard, civil disobedience kind of thing. Like if you think a rule is unjust, don't follow it. So they were just like, here it's $13.99, but it's $9.99 if you go to the Epic Store and buy it.
Right.
With a link. And Apple was like, that's against the rules, and kicked them out.
Which is, like, of all the things that Apple does wrong with the App Store, and it's a long list, that one is like, really? Like, you can't even tell people or give them a link to an outside way to buy something.
Yeah. Well, because they know it.
Like, that seems like, I understand people would not.
Yeah.
Like, people aren't going to use the iOS app, but it just seems so draconian to say, like, you can't even tell people that there's another way to buy this. You have to buy it here. We're taking 30%, and that's it.
And even in places where they can, they were very restrictive about where and how and the number of links and the language you can use and all this other stuff, basically forcing everybody to make it really hard to make it so that somebody can go subscribe somewhere else. And this is where we're at after Apple has capitulated on a lot of stuff. Like this all started with like Netflix, and Apple couldn't afford to not have Netflix on iOS years ago. So they started carving out rules. Oh, streaming apps, it's different. Like you can't go tell somebody to subscribe on the web, but not, unless you're a streaming app, and then it's okay, and then it's then it was like, well, you can't do both. You can't have in-app purchases and then also let somebody go somewhere else to buy it. And it's they're never going to give more than the courts are requiring them to do. There's going to be inch by inch. This is particularly
it constantly makes them look bad. Like each time this story like this comes out, they look like the big bad enemy. And it's like, well, you can just avoid all of this by being reasonable.
It really is. It's just in a world that's just so sick of corporate greed. We have the like richest company in the world who just can't give up. This is not how they make their money. This is not Apple's primary revenue source. Right?
Whatever they get from Patreon is going to be a rounding error on their next quarter results. Like it is such a fraction.
Well, if they change the rules for Patreon
revenue.
If they change the rules for Patreon, they have to change it for everyone else. But like just the whole App Store, the whole App Store revenue as a whole can't be worth the constant court battles everywhere, the bad will, the anger from developers, the anger from people. Just
even if it's like $5 billion a quarter, which it seems unlikely.
Right, just the App Store stuff. Yeah,
Like, just okay, you're making 100
right
in 3 months.
No, that's what I mean.
Like, we're okay here.
So yeah, it just doesn't. It's a real read the room situation. It's a real like, and their excuse for it is it's always about safety. They always say like, well, but buying in the app is safe. Using our systems are safe.
Okay, great.
And so on. And it's like, yeah,
Sure,
but you don't
I
care
agree.
about safety. You don't care about the millions of apps that scam people, as long as they scam people with like,
Right. Well, there's that. Yep.
your payment system. That's
Right.
not safety.
And there's
then-
also the Mac, which has allowed it forever, and people
Right.
figure it out. Like, it's all right. You're also undermining the whole dialogue around how secure the iPhone is as a platform. When you say, yeah, but if you don't use this portion of the store, everything's gonna go crazy. It won't. There's plenty of safeguards built in that will keep the iPhone safe and iOS safe.
And if little tiny independent apps like Amazon and Uber and Walmart and everything can have payment systems in them that aren't Apple's payment system,
Right.
and it's not and the sky doesn't fall,
It's
then
fine.
I just
Yeah, it
don't
works. It's fine.
understand
Yeah.
why. So yeah, this is just the latest thing, and it's just particularly bad because what Patreon really is it's small creators going out hand in hand to
That's exactly what it is.
literal customers and saying
It's like literally like a tip jar.
right, and people
That's
pay
all
their
it
rent.
is.
People pay their
Right.
rent and stuff like that. They're like,
Absolutely.
look, I
Yeah.
want to be an artist I want to make a living as an artist.
Yeah.
Help me do that, people who like my art, and people do. And now, and now Apple's like, ooh, well, some of that's ours.
Right.
That's just so yeah.
Yeah.
So
Kind of along those lines, Christopher Lawley, who actually does the Comfort Zone podcast for Mac Stories, he had some thoughts that he posted on Threads. He said, this has been one of the hardest times to be an independent creator. Ad revenue is in the toilet. Everyone and their mother has a membership, so good luck trying to start a new one, and platforms want their cut. How does Apple not see that they aren't taking 30% from Patreon? They're taking 30% from independent creators, the people they claim to love.
I don't know if they really care. I mean, and I'm not saying that to be like, Apple is targeting anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they care who they get the 30% from as long as they get it, because there's plenty of small app developers that are trying to get their app off the ground, and they're charging them 30% too.
Unless you jump through all those like small business hoops to be part of the small business program, and then you have to do all this math about like, well, it's the first million users and in a calendar year, and then it resets, and they just find every single way to like, well, we're going to carve out this much more and make it a bunch more complex. Just a big Gordian knot of rules and things and stuff.
Like,
just
do you have any?
Everyone 5%. Just be done with it. Everyone.
It would be
5%.
Like the greatest win in Apple history if they came out at next WWDC and just said, you know what, everyone, 7%, and we're done, or 5%, or 3%, whatever the number is.
Yeah,
and that's it. No
make
tiers, no rules, no nothing. Yeah,
but use it as a business advantage, a lever that Apple can only afford to do, that other people can't afford to do, and make it a number so low that other platforms have a hard time competing.
Right.
Then you don't have to worry about the EU and everyone else doing an app store in the EU and stuff, because who's going to do it? Who's going to be excited to go have their game be in the Epic Game Store on iOS in the EU? Right. When they're only going to pay Apple 5% to be in the App Store where everybody is, they'll go just do the App Store. They're,
totally.
just to end it.
And I bet when it all shook out, they probably would make money rather than losing it, because more people would use it, more people would do it, or maybe it would be close, or maybe they would lose a little bit, but it would not be. They wouldn't lose 30%.
Right. Yeah, they wouldn't lose 30%. The volume would go up. More people would put more apps and feel comfortable charging small amounts and stuff like that, and do all these other kinds of things. I don't know. It's just this is Apple's worst nightmare. And the Patreon thing is especially bad
it's
because,
their
like
own...
they said, they always talk about like we're for the creators and the artists and the independent, like people who want to start making for and stuff. Yeah, but Patreon is like the core way people make money, making all the things that you want them to use a Mac to make: music and digital art, all this other stuff,
writing. Yeah,
you're already getting their money because they bought a Mac to do this with, like, and an iPad and stuff.
Yeah, Apple hasn't made any comment about that at all. They probably won't. So
yeah, they never do.
They never do.
This is just App Store.
This is the way of the world, and if you want to live in it, you got to deal with it. But it's just like, man, like they in like a down quarter, they're making like $80 billion. Like, come on. Like, it's okay to give a little bit of that back to make it seem at least like you're giving back to the community that really made you. And every time a story like this comes along, it makes them look that much worse.
Well, speaking of Apple cheaping out, that was a bad segue. I was trying to make a segue there, right? Because there's kind of an intertwined Apple's "what are you doing here, Apple" kind of idea for our next topic, which is about 8 gigabytes of RAM in the Mac.
Oh, yeah.
We love talking about
Apple
this issue.
Yeah, we love this as the other.
So,
Max with 8 gigs, yeah.
Yeah. On X, software developer Hassan Judy posted a screenshot of his M2 MacBook Air with 8 gigabytes of memory. He had no apps open except Activity Monitor, and it showed that 4.7 gigabytes of that memory was in use. That's over half of what he had installed on the Air. So the replies on X went back and forth on whether 8 gigabytes was enough or not enough. A lot of people pointed out that macOS does a lot of caching in anticipation of your next move, and it does. That cache is quickly dumped when the memory needs that space to do something else. For example, I'm using a MacBook Pro, and it has, and I don't mean to brag here, it has 48 gigabytes of memory. This is an Apple loader machine, so it's not like I went out and got it. So Apple put 48 gigabytes. And I did the same thing. I opened up Activity Monitor with nothing else open. And 10 gigabytes was being used as a cache. That sounds like a lot, but that's how Mac OS works.
Yeah, I mean, you want memory, unused memories not helping you. Right. It is that is not making things faster. The only problem is if memory that is being used doesn't get freed up when you do need it. And there's I don't think anybody can really reasonably argue that Apple's memory management is bad. Like, I
can say that on the original M1 machines, it wasn't great. There were issues. I had a 13-inch MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM, and it was a constant problem. I still have it, and it still is. It just didn't. It never quite used it properly. It would use up way too much to do simple things. It wouldn't allocate it properly. Yeah. Things would crash. Since then, it's been much better. I have what do I have here? An M3 Max, I think. I don't even know what the hell I have. Let me look. Yeah, I have an M3 Max with 36 gigabytes of RAM, and so I'm doing a bunch of things right now, including this, and it's using 31, and it runs fine. Like everything is like, as the chip has gotten with these generation of chip, it's gotten better with memory handling.
But also just 36. That's a lot.
I have way more. Like, it's a ton.
I mean, in Apple land, that's a huge chunk of change. The complaint is not that 8 gig machines shouldn't exist or anything like that, or whether 8 is enough. It's that at the price Apple charges for these things, 16 should really be the minimum, especially since this is not exotic RAM or anything. Like people always talk about like, oh, it's so fast. That's just a wide bus. That's not costing them more money. The actual RAM chips going from 8 to 16 costs Apple something like $40 tops.
Mm-hmm. They charge
Max.
$200.
And they charge $200. It's not upgradable later, so you have to get it at the time. You have to buy it from them. It's, I mean, this is just LPDDR4 memory. This is not expensive stuff. Like, I can't remember if the M3 moved to LPDDR5, but still, these are not it's not expensive RAM even the Air at the price they charge these things. 16 is just be 16. But the other thing we should think about is we just saw how Apple Intelligence is dropping this year for iPhones and Macs and stuff.
Right.
And it works on every Mac going back to the M1, but it only works on iPhones 15 Pro and Pro Max or later. And it's because those are the only iPhones with 8 gigs of memory.
Right.
Where
Apple hasn't specifically said that as a requirement, but as Jason said, based on all the models that are supported, the only thing they have in common is that they have 8 gigs of RAM. At least.
It's a WWDC session sort of talked about their AI models that are in use, their large language models and all the stuff that they do on device and how they segment and break it down and to use less memory and stuff. But it's basically 1.5 gigs or so of memory gets used up by these models, right? Mm-hmm. And that's on top of whatever your machine's doing and stuff. So even though an M1 is not a more powerful AI machine than an A16,
current is 17,
but not what's in the Pro. What's in the non-Pro? It's a 16.
Right? So it's the A16,
yeah. Even though that's like a more powerful quote AI chip because it has 6 gigs, it's not enough.
Right.
Think about that for your Mac, right? Think about what if the M1 Max had 6 gigs?
Yeah.
Like they'd be cut off from Apple Intelligence. Think about all the 8 gig Macs you're buying now. Even a brand new one, a brand new M3, the M4 Max are going to start to come out.
You can get a Pro. You can spend $1,600 on a MacBook Pro and only have 8 gigs of RAM.
Right. So just imagine you buy one this year. Maybe it's an M4 model and it has 8 gigs of RAM. And then in 2 years, there's new, more advanced Apple Intelligence stuff. And it requires Macs to have at least 12 gigs of RAM. Right. Like you're going to get a lesser AI version with 8 gigs.
It's a wonder.
Like this is
like
you're buying something to be future proof.
Yeah. So I wonder with the M4s, is 16 in the Max going to be the base? Because if we need 8 gigs to run Apple Intelligence, which we do, I would assume the iPad Mini, which currently has 4 gigs of RAM, and the iPad, the base iPad, the 10th, it'll be the 11th gen iPad. Yeah. I have to assume Apple brings those up to 8 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, and the iPhone SE,
which is a big jump. And the iPhone SE is the other one.
Yeah,
so if all of those go to 8, I have to assume, at least in the Pro models, and maybe even in the Air, that gets raised. The entry level gets raised to 16.
I'm gonna guess that it's gonna be at least until next fall before a MacBook Air has more than 8.
Next fall. So with the M4, you think?
But still,
M4 or M5.
If there's not an M4 this year, if there's not an M4 upgrade this year, but yeah, M5 for sure. But even then, it's like for the next year, you shouldn't be spending $1,200-$1,300 on a notebook.
And I agree. And
then $200 more to not do that, like for $40 worth of RAM. So it's just the price. It's not that they offer it; it's that it shouldn't be offered at that price. It shouldn't cost that much to upgrade it.
Yeah.
They should at least have some sort of offer.
A 13-inch MacBook Air, M1, M2, M3, whichever you buy, because the M1's still available. I mean, with 8 gigs of RAM is great. Like for a student, for someone who's just using it for browsing and mail and watching videos and stuff, it's great.
Mhm.
But when you get into that Pro tier, it should be 16. And as we're going to be 2025, and the Apple Intelligence thing, people are going to start using this on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like 16 really needs to be like the new standard, I think, and we all think. We've been saying it for years.
Yep. Unless they're going to start making sub $1,000 laptops, they really need to do 16 gigs.
I'm not really into Windows. Jason follows that more.
Yeah.
So 16 is basically the floor now for like a
comparably priced laptops. It is for the same thing as a new Air. It is. Yeah.
Okay.
You can buy a Windows laptop for $499. Like it's not like 60.
Or
they have 8 or something.
Okay.
I kind of don't think anybody's got like 6 or 4, but I mean, cheap laptops, sure, but anything that costs what a MacBook Air does new is going to have 16. Some are going to have like 16 and then like also a 4 gig graphics card. It's like a separate graphics chip or something like that, or 8 gig graphics chip or something. And once you start to get into the $1,500 thing, you're looking at either 16 or 32.
32.
And usually an 8 gig graphics card, like a separate graphics thing.
I mean, Apple doesn't sell, but Walmart sells the M1 MacBook Air, which I assume Apple provides through like some partnership that has 8 gigs of RAM. And then you can buy a MacBook Air the same size for $12.99. That's twice as much. And you're still getting 8 gigs of RAM. So yeah, there's a bit of a disconnect. And my guess is the next round of Mac starting in October, I assume, will start with at least 16 gigs of RAM. That 13-inch, the 14-inch base model of the Pro.
The Pros. I believe. My guess would be for all the Pros, anything MacBook Pro will be 16 and up. That would be my guess for sure. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason for that is because 16 is the minimum for the AI Xcode plugin thing.
Oh, okay. That it has to be.
It's 8 for all the AI stuff, but the coding assistant, the Xcode AI coding assistant requires 16. So
I know that.
Yeah. Well, it's a developer thing, so it's not like they make a big splash about it, but it's in the fine print on their site. So I would guess Pros would, but I think it's going to be at least another year before the Airs do, and that's lame. And then there's things like the Mac Mini, like no Mac Mini should have less than 8.
Yeah.
Like
all
it should
those
have less than.
I mean, the iMac has 8. That's powering a 5K display. Like, give me. That's a legitimately good computer. It should have 16 gigs.
And these are supposed to last 4 to 5 years. Like you're not. Right. It's not like I need it now. It's like but are you going to need it in 2027? Right. Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Definitely.
So can't upgrade it. Can't go buy more RAM.
Right.
After.
So I think you can hook up a external RAM drive.
Or like the old days, we could open it up and you could slot in SOD.
Remember those days?
Yeah,
the little circle slot in the bottom of the iMac that you flipped over. That was the little
thing.
Yeah. So hopefully this AI push is going to also push Apple to finally add more RAM to their Macs.
Yeah.
Our final topic of the show is about the upcoming M4 Mac lineup. They're reportedly going to start rolling out this fall and into the spring of next year. I wrote an article that said that Apple should have skipped the M4 and not update the Mac until the M5 is ready. The main reason this should happen is because the M4 is now the iPad Pro. Mac should have a better chip than the iPad Pro, I thought. That's kind of a general gist of it. There were other reasons too, but that was the main idea. I actually thought readers would disagree with me on this, but much of the feedback I got was in agreement. John Scott said it in an email The iPad Pro did not beg for more performance with an M4. Its issues do not involve its lack of performance. Apple needs to start addressing the elephant of iPad OS, outgrowing the impressive hardware the iPad Pro is already capable of.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, I agree
in
with
an
that.
email, Richard Hagan wrote, on everything you were saying about the M4 chip, I was nodding my head saying yes and yes. I have the M4 iPad Pro. I'm typing this note to you right now. I also have the MacBook Pro M3 Max, which I use on my website. It is a beast of a machine, but I see no reason to buy the M4 when it arrives. I will buy the M5 Max for sure. I'm sure a lot of people feel this way. I do believe Apple shot themselves in the foot.
Well, certainly anybody with an M3 Max Mac wouldn't be looking to upgrade to the M4 version anyway. Like,
Yeah,
you
there's
don't need
a
to upgrade that
small, it's a very small number of people who are looking to upgrade from an M3 Max.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I definitely agree. Like the regular M4, yeah, the Mac deserves better, but there will be M4 Pro, M4 Max, maybe
Yeah.
M4 Ultra. We're hearing like they kind of skipped M3 Ultra, and they're in a weird cross cycle thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that, but I also wonder, like, would we all be complaining where are the Macs if there wasn't going to be any until the fall of next year? Like, if that's going to be the M5 timetable, October 2025,
It
we
doesn't
all
have
gonna
to be though. Like they could have been making the M5. Like, all right. So I think the biggest
they
problem
are.
here is that
and they're making
the
M3
M3
too. It takes
the
years.
iPad should have had an M3 chip. Like, why does
Yeah.
it need the M4?
Yeah,
That's
no,
the biggest problem.
all
Or
the
if
other
you really want to
improvements.
separate it, make it like M3X or something, or Z or M3, whatever.
They
But
made
you
they made all
don't-
those
it
other
doesn't need
improvements,
it.
like the display and the thinness
Right.
and stuff like that. Like that's what the iPad was about. And you're right that it doesn't need it. It definitely doesn't need it. But if we're going to say now, well, because it has it, they should have released Macs with an M4. Well, then there's just going to be no new Macs until the M5 is ready, until at least next summer,
Yeah.
if not next fall. And are we cool with that? Like, maybe not.
They came out. So the M3, it started last October, like early November. It shipped,
Yeah.
and then the MacBook Air came out in like March. Oh no, the Pro came out in March. Something came out in March. Oh no, it was the Air. The Air came out in March.
The Air came out.
And then in May, you got the iPad Pro. Like, I just don't understand it. Who at Apple said the iPad Pro needs to have an M4 chip? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense.
Well,
We're
I
in
think,
the M3 generation. Like, why?
it hasn't
It
been
messed everything up, damn it.
well, it hasn't actually been reported, but I think part of it has to do with the production cycle. So Apple is making the M3 as a 3-nanometer chip,
Yeah.
and then TSMC, their chip manufacturer, needs to switch to their enhanced 3-nanometer.
But they're making
Mhm.
Macs. Like, they're
Yeah.
still
Well,
selling
that's
and
what
making
they're saying.
Macs.
But that they're trying to change the Mac as soon as they can. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it, is that the 3-nanometer process used for the M3 is the first one. It's very expensive and not as high volume. And the new, quote, enhanced version is really all about cost reduction. It's about, that's the 3-nanometer that everyone's going to use, not just Apple, but everybody. And it's just much more high volume and much more reliable and cost effective and stuff. So I think it was about, like you said, Roman, it was about that. It was about, like, the M4 is basically like, well, it's the M3 again. Like, it's also not that much better. Like, it's really not.
It's not
No.
so much better.
It's not
If
like
they
a
would have
major.
downclocked it by like 10%, we wouldn't even notice.
Yeah, it's just not. There's not a dramatic thing. I had thought when they did that before the Apple Intelligence announcement and stuff that maybe it was about that. Maybe
Yes.
Apple Intelligence was going to require a certain
I agree.
neural engine performance
But
or
it's
something
not.
like that. But it's not. It's really all about
Yeah.
RAM. It just needs any neural engine
Yeah,
and 8
I
gigs
mean,
of
the
RAM.
iPad, the M1 iPad Pro supports
Yeah,
the same
all
Apple
Ms,
Intelligence
all
as the
M
M4 would, so
series.
there's
Yeah.
no reason for it.
So yeah, so other than that, like I just it's hard to understand what the cycle is and what's available and when. And
I mean,
stuff,
that's
but-
mainly Roman's argument, is that so that Mac's going to get it in October.
Mhm.
And it's like, all right, great, big deal. Like it's supposed to be like an event. The M3 was an event. The M2 was an event. The M4 is like, all right, great. We got it on the iPad 6 months ago.
and it's not that much better than M3.
And it's not that much better.
Which Macs already have. So
Right.
unless something else is coming to those Macs, unless it's like, well, it has an M4, but it also has all these other upgrades, just like the iPad Pro did.
Yeah.
To make you go like, oh, okay, well, the M4 is a gimme. It's 10% performance, whatever. I don't care. It's also better at all they're things,
And we haven't heard anything about that.
We really haven't.
So,
We haven't heard they're doing something special with the display. Or
there's rumors about OLED. There's rumors about a design, but that's mostly next year.
Yeah,
or
next
maybe
year.
even 2026.
A bigger thing, yeah. So, I don't. Just put Face ID on it. Honestly, M4, M3, M5, OLED, I don't care. Put Face ID on the Mac.
They need to get that true depth sensor down like a couple more millimeters to make it work.
Just you can make the, not even millimeters. It's like 1 millimeter. Just make the lid this much thicker.
Yeah.
I am okay with that. I am totally okay with that.
Yeah, it definitely needs to have Face ID. Like, to open up your Mac to have it work, it would just be great.
I mean, nothing wrong with Touch ID, but every time I want to enter a password or something, it's like, oh, look at my keyboard, touch my finger on the thing. Yeah. If it was just seeing my face and just did it because I'm looking at my screen anyway, it's like it would work like it does on your iPhone. It's just magic. You'd see a little blip pop up at the top of the screen, Face ID, and it's done, and it enters the password, and it enters my 2-factor authentication, and done. Just like, make life easy for me.
Yeah, you can hit you got to press return or enter or whatever to make it. Yeah. You don't have to
click OK, whatever.
But, right.
I mean, I think the vast majority of Mac users would be so okay with a very slightly thicker lid.
Sure.
Just to have that
probably
experience.
Wouldn't even notice. I mean, listen, we got the notch for a reason. We dealt with that.
Right, yeah.
We'll be
have a notch. We have a notch when we still have enough bezel to put the camera
the most
there.
useless notch ever. I'd love to know, we need like a Netflix 3-part documentary on why they put that notch on the MacBook Pro, because it's not needed. The iPad has a little tiny bezel and there's a camera in it. Do that.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
And there's nothing else there. It's the iPhone needed it because it had 6 different sensors for Face ID. There's nothing there. It's not there.
It's just
this little normal, not great webcam.
No, they haven't even introduced any OS enhancements to make it a.
There's no dynamic
UI
notch
anchor.
or anything. No.
Yeah, it's all through third parties.
It doesn't get in the way. I'm like, it doesn't bother me.
No,
I just want to know why it's there.
All that bothers me is the sort of process of I don't understand why.
Why?
Yeah.
So I agree with you, Roman, that the M4 aspect of M4 Max is not going to excite me because that's not what excites me about the M4 iPad. So,
right.
Yeah, that's definitely not going to be like, ooh, great, new Max, M4. M4 Pro, M4 Max, I'll see what they do. That might be interesting.
Yeah,
that might be interesting, but other than that, M4 is really just as much about Apple paying probably 20-30% less for each chip than they do on the M3 because the chips
it all comes down to money. All these hot take shows always come down to Apple's profit margin.
They make, if they're we laugh, but if they make product decisions that affect the users based on well, what does it cost us? Are we going to make a little less money on this and stuff like that? Then that's part of what we should be talking about because it affects users. It affects us, the people who use these things, their decisions around this.
Yeah. Well, that does it for this episode of the Macworld Podcast, episode 897. Thanks to Jason Cross.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael Simon.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks to you, the audience. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to the Macworld Podcast in the podcast app, on Spotify, on YouTube at the Macworld Podcast channel, or through any other podcast app. Do you have any comments or questions? Send us an email at podcast@macworld.com or contact us through X, that's at Macworld, or on Threads, that's at Macworld_HQ, or on the Macworld Facebook page. Join us in the next episode of the Macworld Podcast as we talk about the latest in the world of Apple. See you next time.
I don't. That's probably mine turned off.
Yeah, I thought I had mine on. But
Do I have it? Do I have it?
yeah, I have it on. Maybe I just didn't do
You're
it
too
long
close. You're too close from.
enough. Oh, is that what it
Yeah,
is? I'm too
I think
close.
I can't understand what you're doing.
No, I don't see it at all.
Oh,
There
yeah,
you go.
there it goes. There you go. No, it's too late.
The moment's
late.
passed.
The
Oh,
moment's
yeah, I had
fast.
my reactions off. That's why.